but I did have to change my plates. Like, I'm officially registered as a New Hampshire resident.
Right. What do they call themselves out there? Do they call them the Hampshireans?
I think New Hampshireite sounds correct.
I wish there was a test. I wish you had to take a test every time you leave your state in order to get your new license. And part of this test is like a 5-question sample that asks you questions about your state. And it's like, if you fail it, then they say, well, you may have bought a home here and have contributed to some income tax, but you're not getting that license. Not until you pass
or maybe
that
the toll person on the bridge can just ask you, and if you fail, you have to turn around.
You have to go back.
I think there are a few states in the
shall not
union that
pass.
would love that. Way to keep out the riffraff. I think most of New England would enjoy that from the Connecticut people. I think like Rhode Islanders in general, and people up north with when it comes to what is it, the fall? What do they call it? The foliage season.
The leaf peepers.
Leaf peepers. See, they even have. You really are New Hampshire right now. You've got vocabulary to describe it. To us, it's just people who want to go and enjoy to look at some beautiful scenery with their children.
Is leaf peeper a derogatory term?
Yeah, it sounds like it.
It sounds like what the shore people call like bennies or something like that. Oh, if people from the north or wherever they're coming, if they come to like Seaside Heights, Point Pleasant, usually the locals will call them bennies.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's like 2 other terms. It's like where these people are from. It's like a mishmash of the different regions or the states that they come from that form these words. But yeah.
Do you see why I need you on too? So because like I don't know what that is, but I would have felt out of touch. It would be like, oh, I'm just an out of touch New Yorker, but you're actually from Jersey and had never heard the term Benny. So it's like,
yeah,
but New Jersey's got like 4 distinct areas.
That is true, and I was very distinctly from North Jersey, so I think I missed out on some like South and Central Jersey.
There's like North, Central, South, and then the people where I'm from would argue that there is a shore. That like the shore along the coast is a 4th.
Gotcha.
That sounds about right.
This is what I want to dive into at some time. Not today.
But the interesting thing too is that like you now live in New Jersey, so you have this other perspective where you came into it. So this would be a really good combination of New Jersey representatives here.
I have the perspective of a New Yorker who happens to reside in Jersey. So I don't really know how helpful that is to Jersey people. I feel like I guess I'm a Benny, if you will. So I don't know if that's really, but I have a lot of thoughts, which is why I want to ask you guys a lot of questions at some point. It's another episode, but it's going to be very localized. But I have so many questions about what is the state that calls itself New Jersey. But right now I want to hear more about the state that calls itself New Hampshire.
I'm here to represent.
I love. So what is it? You have the license plate now. What is or the license? Do you have a car?
I do.
Okay, because you need a car where you live.
I do need a car.
Okay. Are you rural? Would you consider yourself rural now, or is it like is all of New Hampshire rural?
I would consider myself to be living in a rural part of New Hampshire, but not all of New Hampshire is. There are major cities like Manchester and Concord, but I'm in the White Mountains, which is pretty remote in a way. I'm like 2 hours from Portland, about 2 hours from Manchester, 3 hours from Boston. So I'm out here. My town
Canada? Does New Hampshire?
New Hampshire does touch Canada.
Okay.
I am not that far. I think I might be about 3 hours from the Canadian border.
Oh, that's pretty close to Canada.
I know. I should go to Canada. I keep thinking like I could go to Montreal just for fun one day because that's close enough.
There are people in this country who are basically commuting to Canada. I mean, 3 hours. That's what is that? That's like a Biden Delaware trip. 3 hours, Delaware to DC. I mean, that's doable. It's actually closer, I think, Delaware's, but that's beside the point. You technically probably could work in Canada and come home on the weekends.
I could, but would I?
Yeah. You're like, but why? New Hampshire has everything I need.
Now I do not like commuting at all. I did have to go to Boston a couple weeks ago for a concert. Yeah. And I mean, I chose to go. Mm-hmm. Driving through Boston is like difficult after driving around here because I'm used to just like 40 minutes to an hour to get to trailheads. Like that's pretty standard. Even though I'm in the mountains, you have to drive around the mountains. But I've adapted to like the country roads. You know, it's like windy, peaceful. There's no traffic. And then I go into Boston and I'm like, wow, the New Jersey part of me has left my body. I don't know how to do this anymore.
And it's for the better, I would argue.
It is.
Every time you get in the car, does John Denver just start belting through the
he calls me back to West Virginia. Yes.
That's wild though. That's wild. I mean, yeah. So you're rural. I mean, I think at this point we could say you're rural.
I think so, which is different, you know?
Yeah.
I grew up in a town right outside of Manhattan, basically. So it's different, but I love it. And I don't think I could go back. I mean, there are a lot of downsides to being kind of like, I mean, I'm not in the middle of nowhere, right? It's not that remote. Like the town closest to me, North Conway, has an REI and a Starbucks. Like, I do want to reiterate that I'm not just like in the middle of nowhere. But
you have electricity.
I have electricity.
You have running water.
Yeah. But
do you have a well? Is your water coming from a well, or is it actually, there's no like centralized town water, is there? Or?
No, I guess it is well water. It must be, because there is no
wondering. Yeah. And you have like a septic tank too, probably.
I do have a septic tank.
So you don't even have like there's no sewage system where you are.
I guess not. I didn't think about this.
Yeah. Yeah, you got a lot going on there. You got to like work out like that gray matter, like black matter kind of thing. You've got like there's probably some sort of runoff system that's using the soil or something to like filter out for your, I'm assuming. I'm just assuming.
Probably. I should look into this. I mean,
probably. You should probably check out your sanitation, your situation. Just you're going to be self-reliant when when you leave civilization.
That's true.
And there's a lot of ups to it. Like you don't have like your sewage tax, things like that. But
I should really start to learn more about New Hampshire. I do finally feel like I officially live here, so it's time.
I think it's fantastic, though. I'm really proud of you. Actually, I think it's so cool to have someone uproot and move to where they feel most comfortable. I think that more people should do that, and a lot more people be happier making that kind of move. But you do have to be quite fortunate in order, like, you're a remote worker now.
Yeah. I was just about to say, like, thank you for acknowledging that, because it is great. And I'm happy I made the move, but it really rested upon being able to work remotely.
All right.
And there are moments where I have pangs of fear that, working remotely won't be possible at some point. But for now it is. So I'm living in the moment. But I mean, there are jobs up here too. There are a variety, but I do like having the benefit of working remotely and living here. So there's a privilege element.
And what brought you to there was it a chance visit, or did something attract you?
I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because I'd say like my best introduction was when I hiked the Appalachian Trail and hiked through New Hampshire on it. That put the White Mountains like more definitely on my radar. But I did take 1 or 2 trips beforehand up to the Presidential Range here and to Franconia Ridge. So I knew it was like the closest set of real mountains to New Jersey. Because, it's like about 8 hours from New Jersey, which is far, but not that far. So when I was trying to figure out where to live in 2020, I looked at Vermont and New Hampshire, because both seemed like good mountainous places to be with hiking communities. And I found a better option here. So it really worked out very well. I do think there was an element of luck involved. Like, this was on my radar, but I didn't even understand at the time how great of a town I ended up in, because I'm like a quarter mile from the Welcome to the White Mountain National Forest sign. Like, that's a dream I didn't realize I had, but I got a bit lucky in that regard.
Would you say that most people who move there specifically for the White Mountains, or is there a mix of different callings that kind of bring people out there, or is there just not a lot of people who actually do move there? Most people have just grown up and stayed.
That's a great question, because it does seem like there's been an influx of people moving here since 2020, because I met a lot of people this summer who did move here in the last 3 years or so. Some people have ties to the region just from like their families either having like a house here or nearby. But a lot of people seem to work remotely and have moved up here pretty much to have access to the mountains and pursue whatever sport is their main interest. I mean, a lot of people love winter sports. So I'd say people who love skiing and snowboarding definitely are drawn to this area. But then there's like, you know, a ton of hiking and mountain biking and basically everything you could imagine. Climbing also draws a lot of people here. So yeah, I'd say a lot of people move here because of the outdoors,
right.
And the community around it.
Yeah. And since you moved, I mean, I do want to get to the reason we brought you on, because you've done basically something that few human beings in this world ever. Besides, I mean, your hiking is one thing, which is few people ever do that. But yeah, before I get into that, I just wanted to say the people who moved there, would you say that you spend more time outside now than you used to, at least when you lived in the tri-state?
Absolutely. I'd say I'm outside basically whenever I have free time, before work, after work, the weekends. I mean, I ran when I lived in New Jersey. So I'd say before work, I was always running. And on the weekends, I would do like a long run and one hike. But I would say my weeks now are built more around my outdoor pursuits than anything else. And I have now made a lot of connections with people who also have the same kind of outlook and goals. So I could meet someone for a run before work and then meet someone for like a walk or a hike after work. Whereas like in New Jersey, that would have been like maybe meeting up for dinner after work, right? Like it'd be different.
Nice segue to running.
To
that's
running.
What this is about. So what did you do? Tell the people, tell the listeners, because this is I find it phenomenal. I think it's just the bee's knees. I aspire to it one day, despite the fact that I've only run, I think, 6 times since the pandemic began. So it's horrible, but
you are a runner
at heart.
Yes.
I'm losing my card. I'm losing the mantle of it, but at heart, I feel like I still have running in my spirit. But you're actually a runner. You're doing it. What did you do? Tell us about it. Tell the people. Let us into your world.
Okay. So I recently participated in a last person standing race. It's a specific format of ultra running. It's also called like a backyard ultra. This one was specifically called Bubba's. And the standard loop, it's hard to explain this, right?
Okay.
I feel like I need to take a step back.
Yeah. Go for it.
First of all, I would like to say that I, at my heart, am like a road and track runner. And in the last year, specifically this past summer, I have found myself immersed in a larger community of trail runners. And most of my friends who thru hike, they now trail run. And people here, they go and trail run. And it's been a mystery to me because some of the trails here are very like vertical, rocky, technical. You know, there's tons of routes. It's not like this like single track dirt trail.
Yeah, it's not manicured. So basically we're not talking about like, so if there are any listeners out there, I used to run cross country, and cross country trails, especially when you compete, they're manicured. They don't just let you go off into the woods and then just do a couple of markings on some trees and say, all right, everyone go run, and 60 high schoolers go compete against each other. Anyone, and basically if you finish, that's the winner. It's not like that. You know, it's not a last man standing kind of situation.
Right.
The trails are specifically manicured. They usually remove roots, stubs, stumps, or anything that might make you trip necessarily. It's like soft ground, nothing too vertical. You're never going up a mountain necessarily. Like, you know, anything that's, what is it, like loose rock or anything like that. You're not running through that. It's nice. I actually miss it. I miss it a lot. It's the perfect style of running, personally, to me. Far less boring than track, but far safer, I would say, than running hiking trails, which is what I feel like a lot of when you call yourself a trail runner, I feel like that's what they're doing. They're running like hiking trails. It's
right.
I feel like it's a lot more dangerous, a lot more precarious, and you have to be far more mindful than when you're running something like a high school cross country track.
Yes.
Like a high school cross country race, for instance.
And that's the thing. I've really been grappling with that because I kind of liked the division of running on roads and tracks and then hiking on trails. Yeah. But everyone's like, why don't you just run on the trails? So this was the first summer that I actually started to do it and like pay attention to what other people were doing. And I realized when you trail run here and pretty much everywhere, when the grade of the climb gets to be steep enough, it's acceptable to walk. And like power hike up this and still refer to it as a run, which hurts my brain as kind of a rigid black and white person where I'm like, you're either running or you're hiking or you're walking, you know, like I know when I'm doing one or the other.
I imagine it's kind of like mountain biking in a way, right? Where sometimes they're just very methodical, how they're hopping their bike over boulders or down steep cliffs, and then they get back to the riding part.
Yes. Yeah. It's like kind of mixed activity, right? Like sometimes you will even walk the bike at times.
That's
so
what
like
I was wondering. Yeah, I mean, my uncle used to do what is it, like the mountain biking kind of thing, and there's many races where he would finish on foot because he'd either wrecked his bike,
right,
or just an injury or something like that happened, and that still counted. And I when I was a kid, I used to chide him a lot, and you're like, that's ridiculous. If you can't finish on a bike, that shouldn't count as a race. Like you did not bike this race, you walked with a bike. I don't know if you call that mountain biking. It's like mountain walk my bike through a finish line. That's what I would call that sport.
Mixed mountain motion.
Yeah, there you go. Mixed mountaineering with a bike. MMBs.
So that's the thing, right? It's like conceptually, I had to come to terms with the fact that this is how trail running operates. And then I started to embrace it. So I did a lot more running this summer on trails. And honestly, it's pretty fun because you do get to see like a lot more, like more efficiently, basically. So things that would take me like, or, you know, trails that would take me about 6 hours were now taking me more like 4.5. Like I could cut some time off, which it's not always about that, but it does feel kind of satisfying to move a little bit faster. So I did have some like goals on my radar for this summer, like standard events. So, you know, I did a lot of like long hikes, like traverses and loops up here that are pretty standard. And I can talk more about that too, because there's the culture up here is pretty intense with the trail running. It's like not casual. Everyone's trying to like do super long days with lots of elevation gain and as fast as they can. But so I was drawn to this race that I participated in called Bubba's Backyard Ultra. And it follows the last person standing format, which traditionally it's about a 4.2 mile loop that everyone who's participating in the race gets to the start line and has 1 hour to complete this loop. And then on the hour, every hour, you get to start again. So the idea is that you keep going until no one can go anymore. So it ultimately comes down to two people. You know, when that second person stops running, the first person wins, essentially.
Is there like a formal I quit kind of thing? Like, is there an actual tap out? Like, do they have like a special bell you ring to let everyone know that you're done?
Like, a term? Like a kumite term?
What's that?
It's a blood sport reference. It's fine.
All right. I'm out of that loop.
For any listeners who listen to all our episodes, they're like, oh, yeah, of course. It's a blood sport reference, naturally. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So, yeah, but is there, how do you say I'm done? How do you say you bested me?
There's no bell. It's a quiet quitting. And you basically walk up to the directors and you're like, I'm done. Or like, well,
it's a whisper. Does the director go, speak up, son?
I can't hear you. Well, here's the thing. There are two ways to quit, right? Okay. It's called a DNF, like did not finish, I believe is what it stands for. Yeah. So one option is you complete your lap and then you choose to not go into the next lap. You're like, I'm done. Like I've done what I can do. Or you time out on your lap, which is what happened to me. So, you know, you just don't make it back within the hour. And then you're just out because you didn't complete it in time. Let's see. So I did 15 laps officially that counted. Mm-hmm. So that came out to about 54 miles. But I was on my 16th lap.
Yeah.
I just didn't complete it in time. So at the end of the day, my Garmin watch read like 58 miles, but
So you timed out.
I timed out. So that
you weren't DNF, you timed out.
But technically everyone DNFs except for the one person. So
okay.
I didn't finish the race technically because the only one person finishes the race. It's such an interesting concept. And honestly, I was drawn to it because it's kind of fun to have like an ambiguous race distance. Like it's frustrating, but it's kind of cool.
So wait, what happens if the last two people don't make it back within the hour?
That's a great question.
I can see it. I was like, wow, I didn't even think about that. What does happen?
What does happen? Then there's no winner? No.
A gentleman comes out with pistols.
Well, it depends on who dropped first, I think, because technically they both finished the prior lap.
Is it just who's ahead when the timer runs out?
I guess so. I don't know what the rules are.
I'm glad I could help.
Good question.
I'm glad I could add a little bit more ambiguity.
Maybe I just can't think of
ambiguous racing.
Yeah. I guess that's interesting, right? Like, what if they both timed out?
What if they both just get to the start of the next one and look at each other and just give each other a handshake and do not start again? Does that mean you get two winners?
I think you could.
You probably do. I mean, that sounds like a Disney movie. I hope someone does that. I hope Disney comes in and does an ultra marathon race. I mean, it's a beautiful story. It's this style of racing, I think, lends itself at least to.
The whole world of ultra running, I'm finding, is different. It's like more community oriented. You know, it didn't feel like, even though this race, it is a race and you're running against other people, it doesn't quite have that competitive edge to it. Like, yes, it's a competition, but it almost feels like everyone's in it together. It felt like the most communal race I've ever done because you're all just like showing up to the line,
right.
You know, and you're like, all right, off to do another lap. And, you know, people do start dropping out. But it took quite a while. Like, people still did really well in this race, even though we had a pretty terrible weather weekend. Honestly, like a tropical storm came through, basically like the Friday night, Saturday, and early Sunday. So it went from looking like ideal weather conditions to basically the worst weather conditions. Yeah. And I think it might have rained like 1 to 2 inches. The course got super muddy, like to the point where as time went on, it was just getting so slick that you're like taking a step forward and sliding back. There were a few spots where you had to cross, you know, water, not like truly deep, but probably like shin deep. There were some boards over it, but the course got really slippery and a lot slower.
Wait, so do you get to change your socks or something, or you're running in soaking wet shoes for 50 something miles? That sounds painful.
So that is another interesting part of this format, right? Because everyone has a different strategy. You have 1 hour to complete the distance. And actually this course was not 4.2. It was like, depending on who you talk to, it was either 3.5 or 3.6. I'm pretty sure it was 3.6 miles and maybe like 200 feet of elevation gain. So they kind of figured that balanced out the missing mileage component. You have an hour to complete this. So you can either run, you know, as fast as you can and maybe complete the lap in 40 minutes and have 20 minutes to rest and recover. Or you can take as much time as you want and have maybe like 5 to 10 minutes to recover. So you have time theoretically to change your socks, your shoes, your clothes, like sit down, eat, drink water. And, you know, I think for the majority of the laps that I did, I finished at 50 minutes almost every single time. So I had about like 10 minutes to spare, which felt like a good amount of time, but somehow like it's enough time, but you do have to be like efficient. I would say for a race like this, it's really helpful to have a crew of people supporting you. So a lot of people had like friends or family come out, set up a little tent, and then like provide the supplies and sort of help you might need. And I was fortunate that I did have some friends there that like kind of stepped in and helped me. But when I hopefully do this race next year, I will have like a dedicated crew because you need to take advantage of that time. It's like part of being successful in this format. you just have to be like a machine and basically like run very consistently, show up, get your life together in the minutes that you have, and then just get back to the line and just keep going. So I had about 10 minutes to spare on most of the laps, but as time went on, going into lap 15, I had about a minute and a half. Like I was running low on time and I knew it. I was like sprinting. It wasn't really sprinting, but it felt like sprinting because I was like, if I don't make it in the hour, like I'm out. So I made it in time. I had about a minute and a half. My two friends showed up. They like brought me a new shirt. I drank some mystery caffeine and then I got back on the line. And
Is
then
there like a loud boom in the air to say like 10 minutes left? Like you're running. Are you checking your watch? Like
they whistled, like one of the race directors just whistled and gave us like a 2 to 3 minute kind of warning. But then
not the Hunger Games, essentially. That's what you're saying.
That's what I was thinking.
There was no Hunger Games boom. Yeah. Like every time someone drops out, that would add some
it would
drama to the race. Just a big
it would add drama.
And they show your face in the sky.
That would be great. Well, so I did have a little bit of drama though, because going into my 16th lap, which ended up not counting because I didn't finish it, I had literally seconds to spare. Like I was finishing my 15th lap and I thought I was out. I was like, there's no way I got back in time. And I could see some of the racers coming towards me because the direction of the course changed based on a coin flip. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm out. And they were like, no, you're not out. Cross the line. Cause like there was enough time for me to make it across the line and turn around before everyone had started. Oh, so God. I like made it with literally like a second to spare, which was great because I didn't want to be out, but also I had no water, no snacks. Like I just basically turned around and I was like, well, here we go. Another 2.6 miles. And I felt pretty good in that last lap until maybe 30 minutes in where I was like, I just can't do this fast enough. So I finished like 12 minutes late. And I felt totally content with my experience. I was like, I gave it everything I could. This was way farther than I thought I would ever run.
That is amazing.
But the people who won are super impressive. The man who won, his name is Ed Clifford. He's, I think, in his like mid to late 50s. He's won this race every year for the last 5 years. So this was his 5th win and he ran for 39 hours, which is like 136 miles.
Now, does he have like corporate sponsors as a pit crew where he's coming in? And
that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, yeah, does he have like his run crew? Is there like 22 people? Like every time he finishes, he gets they bring out a stool, they bring out a wet towel and someone fanning him. And then there's someone massaging his calves.
It's like laying on an air mattress.
He's got like a cut man. He's just it's like a doctor that's sitting there checking his heart rate, cutting his eyelashes to make sure he can still see at the end. Is there anything like that going on?
Actually, so his wife is his crew and she is on top of it. Like I actually just listened to it. Okay. Yeah, I listened to an interview with him today on this podcast called From the Backcountry that this guy Will Peterson hosts, and he came in second place in this race. So it was a really interesting interview because he was the person who dropped that then, made it. They call it like the assist if you're the second person, because you're basically keeping the race going, right? Like you could push the race for as long as you want to. Like it's kind of on you to decide like when the race ends. So he interviewed Ed and his wife, and it sounds like he has a really like streamlined process, and his wife Dawn is really on top of all of it. So yeah, he gets to his like little tent, sits down. He has like 5 to 8 minutes on average. He eats something, drinks something, changes his shoes and whatnot. So yeah, I think part of success is really having a dialed in sort of process for when you do get back to your little station, and having at least like 1 to 2 people who know what you need and can be kind of, supportive, but also tough and like remind you to get back out there. Honestly, like after this experience, I want to be on someone's crew. I can't wait for one of my friends to tell me they need a crew because I think it's such a unique role to play, like you have to be this like consistent person and kind of anticipate what someone else needs and just provide it. It's a cool dynamic, actually, like crew and athlete. So
is there like a cash prize? Like, is this his job? Is this his profession?
I actually don't know what he does professionally. He's a great ultra runner, but I don't think he's sponsored or anything. Like maybe like some minor sponsorships. Like you can get some athletic brands to send you gear and whatnot. I don't know. He's not a professional runner as far as I know. I could be wrong, but most of these people are just out, doing it for the love of it.
Yeah.
There are very few professional ultra runners.
Yeah.
So I mean, the thing I thought was the most interesting about this, besides the fact that people are insane and accomplishing hundreds of miles, and I mean, it's just not 100, but yeah, anyway. But I was shocked, and not shocked. It was very Born to Run. I felt like Born to Run gets a lot of flack, and it started the whole like I run marathons in sandals stuff. But the one thing I did take away from it that I did like, and I think that was like the most science based sort of aspect to Born to Run, is that basically the author came with two takeaways. One was that in the longer the race, the more even the sexes. So women have as much chance to win against like a pinnacle athlete male the longer the race goes on, because women are like, I guess in some ways better conditioned at long distance running,
right?
But it's longer than what we think of as long distance running. Like 26 miles is kind of nothing for the human condition,
right?
If you're an efficient runner. So it's like we're talking about like in a race against a man and a woman over like 160 miles, the woman is more likely going to win. And then the other thing is that age plays a factor. And the older you are, the better you are at running a longer distance. So even though like a 22-year-old will beat most 60-year-olds if you were racing for 26 miles. But if you like quadruple it, if you're running for 200 miles, a 60-year-old is much more likely to beat someone that is much younger than them. And I thought it really played out here, because the guy who came in second, he's like what? You said he was mid-20s or
yeah,
30s?
25.
Right.
And
a 25-year-old lost in a race against a guy in his mid-50s over, what was the distance again?
About 136 miles.
Which is like, I was like, that was classic Born to Run. Like, that was classic Born to Run playing out right there. That was I was like that. I was a little floored. I was like, wow, it's true. It really it plays a role. Wow.
You're totally right too, because the last four people, it was evenly split too between men and women. And the third place person, like if you were to place them, is this woman, Megan Jensen, who's in her like late 30s, and she did 119 miles. So she really only ran like 4 to 5 hours less than like second and first place.
Yeah.
But she came out and ran like a really strong race. And yeah, it was cool to see that kind of distribution. It's like not what you would expect to see at like a 5K or a 10K. So it's really cool.
Not even in a marathon, it's nothing that most people see. Exactly. Like the way that we talk about sports and athletics, most athletes of sports that do make a lot of money, you're done by the time you're in your late 30s. You're right. You play tennis, you're done by the time you're like early 30s, if that, late 20s, you're like washed up. And running is like the great equalizer. It's crazy. And yeah, it's just a wild thing.
It is. And it gives me hope too. It feels really fun to participate in something where, really anyone could win.
Yeah. That's what's wild about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
In my head, I'm picturing like the biathlon or something from the Olympics, where you have people going through this terrain and then I mean, the biathlon's a little different, but I guess here you're talking about this pit crew. I assume there's a finish line. I assume that's where a lot of people are gathered, maybe a typical type of race. But are there observers, viewers anywhere else on the course? Or, are they like lining up next to the trail in any place? Or is it always congregating at that finish line?
There were a few pockets of people, not many, because once you kind of got out onto the trail, it felt like you were far enough from the start finish that it would be kind of a pain to go to as a spectator. But there were a couple pockets, like maybe within a half a mile of the start and finish. So it was kind of nice to look forward to people being there. And it was interesting because like I said, we'd flip a coin every lap. So I honestly lost complete track of like whether or not it was counterclockwise or clockwise because it just got to be too fuzzy. But there was a period of time, I think, where we did like 3 counterclockwise loops back to back to back and then like switch the direction. So, you know, people would be in the same places, but you wouldn't always see them at the same part of that lap. It was interesting.
Yeah. So you have people there. It's interesting because I'm trying to understand like the terrain. Do they like stuck there? It's like once you're there, you're kind of there for the whole race, or is there a path for them to leave? Because I'm assuming the trail is one way to enter and exit, but are there other access points?
There were like a few lots you could kind of drive into. I mean, the interesting part about this race is it truly is in the backyard of this man.
Oh.
Yeah, this man's backyard. So there's this
property. Okay. It's
his
like
property, yeah.
Privately owned property. I get it. Okay. Does wildlife ever disrupt these races?
I suppose it could, but I don't think that any wildlife has appeared. I'm trying to think if I saw anything. Nothing.
They're afraid, right?
Yeah,
probably.
That's exactly it. Most wildlife are afraid. Yeah.
And there were 100 people. I think it was 98 people started this race. So you're kind of in this like big line of people for most of the time, which is different. So, you know, you kind of have like a presence, like you're all sort of moving around the same pace. There was, of course, like a group of people who went out pretty fast. So there was like a division in between the groups, but most of the time everyone was kind of like locked up in a line.
I mean, that would sound like a stampede to any animal. So I mean,
right. That's what I'm thinking.
Actually clear out from that. Yeah.
How does your gear differ? I mean, I assume your boots or whatever the terminology is would be different from the normal type of running that you do, but is there anything else that is different?
Well, I wore the trail runners. Like I wear Ultra Lone Peaks because they seem to work the best for me. And I wear them hiking, but I also wore them for this race. And that stayed pretty standard. I wore like typical running clothes. I did have my running vest on for some of the laps, which was kind of nice because then I was able to carry snacks and water with me. I also used like a handheld water bottle for the first time for like the first bunch of laps because it was kind of nice to not have like anything on, but to still have water and like one snack to consume. So I tried to stay on top of hydration that way. But pretty standard gear. I did break out my trekking poles in the last few laps as well because I needed like some actual traction. Like it was getting so muddy that I was like, well, maybe the trekking poles will help. But most people do not use them. So it's kind of like you can use them, but it's not that common.
Do you think it's because are you expending a little bit too much energy by having to like hold them up as opposed to just
I think so.
Yeah.
And it's a little crowded too at the start. So like it would be hard to use them around other people. But I just felt like I was falling apart. And so it was my last effort at trying to put myself together.
So I was going to ask this question before, but then I feel like you kind of answered it, but I'll ask it anyway. You said this was a 3.5 mile loop.
Yes.
My initial question was going to be, when you were on hikes, did you ever see trail runners? But it sounds like these types of races are always on a closed course, even though it's a trail.
So a lot of ultras are on sort of like open trails, but I haven't personally crossed paths with a specific race. There are some really long ones, like 200+ mile races, and I think that's maybe where you're more likely to cross paths with ultra runners in the midst of a race. Like out west typically.
I was just thinking that like what is it, like the Western 100 or something like that?
Yeah,
like really famous ones.
Yeah, there are like now all these ultras are on my radar. I'm like, there are so many. There are so many, but they're competitive to get into as well. So it's complicated. But yeah, so I've run into people trail running, especially out in Colorado. I think that's where I saw the most people. Like I'd be in the middle of what felt like nowhere and I would see someone running up with like their little running vest on. And I'm like, where did you come from? Where is the nearest trailhead? Because I thought we were pretty far away. But you know, they probably were out for like a 30 or 40 mile run. Who knows?
Wow. So crazy. It's just insane. I mean, it's beyond what most people think of as possible. Because most people set their sights on, they're like, yo, I want to do something really ambitious with my with my waning athletic years. Usually it's or just like I've never run a race before, and I'm going to train. What is it like? It's like couch to 5K, and then someone's like, you know what, I'm going to do a marathon, and you're like, that's like the end goal, the marathon. And then there's a whole world out there of people who are just every year running 200 miles as just part of the thing. It's just what I do.
What is the training for that? Does that mean like how many days a week are you running 200 miles? How do you train for that?
The training for a last person standing race specifically did confuse me, right? Because it's not like you're running a 100-mile race. You could be running 100 miles or more, and you kind of want to be prepared for a range of miles. For example, actually the World Championship Backyard Ultra just happened, I think on the 21st of October. And the guy who won, he ran 108 hours, which is like 450 miles in 4.5 days, I believe.
Are they taking like performance enhancement drugs? Is that like a thing in this?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I feel like the spirit of ultra running is so pure that probably not. But I imagine that
about baseball.
That's what they said about cycling.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. It's very possible. And maybe like doping will be, maybe there will be tests for the ultra community. I don't actually know for something like at the highest levels if they do test. Like, I don't know. I haven't heard about it, but that's not to say that.
I was going to ask you because I was going through, you said like there was like 150 miles, 140 miles as people running. And I was like, well, are there any outliers that would cause curiosity, skepticism? And then you're like 450. And I'm like, oh, okay. So that's right. A lot. But you said it's over a couple days.
Yeah. I mean, but it was the same backyard format. So these people were starting on the hour every hour. And the guy who, there were two people who ran almost for that long because the guy dropped like at 107.
Is there no break? Is it like that's straight 100?
Yeah. So I don't know. I wasn't following it closely enough to see like what the strategy was, like how much time they had in between laps. But I mean,
the sleep deprivation alone, you would think would get you before 4 days worth of running on the hour every hour.
You can't do that. That's not possible, right? That's
happened. Everyone was like, their minds were blown. But these people, I think to even qualify for this world championship, like you had to have won another backyard ultra. Like, so these people have a demonstrated history of winning. I would have to double check that, but they're like serious athletes. But it's just an interesting format because it does test different skills. Like, being able to manage sleep deprivation, hydration, nutrition.
Going to the bathroom, I guess, like you just,
go on yourself. I would assume like
right
country days. That's the way I remember.
Because how often? Like, it's blowing my mind to think that you would run for 4 days straight and actually never sleep and rest, and you're making it within an hour every time. I don't know. It's hard for me to compute, but I am.
It is hard to
participate in this. So.
I feel like I still like I wrote it down because I was like, is this really what happened? And it is, as far as I know, that is what happened. But it makes sense because it's like the best of the best at this specific format. And the guy who won, his name is Harvey Lewis. He is American and he, I think, is 47 years old and a vegan, I believe, which I was like, maybe it's like some vegan.
There you go.
Vegan powers.
Has anyone ever crossed over into like a regular marathon and like won that?
No, I can't imagine it. No.
What do you mean?
Like someone who won one of these ultra things ran on like the track or road, like you were saying before. Has anyone ever done like are they like champions in different disciplines? I don't know how you would describe this.
I'm so curious about that. And I think about it a lot because I wonder which direction predicts the outcome. Like, would someone who can run 450 miles over days beat someone in a road marathon? I don't know.
I doubt it. No, because the speed, you're not running at that speed. Plus, you're older. It's so marathon speed is sprinting. There's only so long a human being can sprint before you would give out. And when you're running an ultra, you're not sprinting. It's a different style of running. You're not going full out for as long as humanly possible. I mean, Do I think a marathon runner could do quite well in an ultra? Sure, but the odds of beating a guy who could run for 4 days straight, I would say that probably the best marathon runner in the world probably couldn't do it.
Right.
Not without serious like retraining that would basically ruin their marathon career. So maybe in a post-marathon phase.
And there is a movement of, I think, standard track Olympians starting to move into trail races.
I could see that, yeah.
Because it's like they're fast, right? Like they're still elite athletes and they'll probably do better than most people. Absolutely. But I think it's still a struggle. It's so different from what they're used to because it is time oriented. A lot of these ultras have time cutoffs, but usually they're pretty reasonable, like if you're already at that level. So it's just, it's so different. But it does like open up, more years of successfully racing, I think.
Well, and the thing is, I was actually thinking, Jamie, you might answer your own question because we were talking about, I don't remember what we were talking about, but it was something to the effect of if you are a professional athlete, the damage you do to your body in order to maintain that peak athleticism cuts your later years short in terms of success as whatever you want to do. Like, if you're not at that elite level. So I'm just thinking that if you're a marathon runner and you're going like the guy who just broke the world record, he ran like a marathon under 2 hours. If you're pushing your body for years at your youth in order to do accomplishments like that, the odds that your body can then recoup and run 400, 300 miles in your 50s, it's like you hear from most professional athletes, they can barely stand up usually. And by the time they're in their 50s, it's like they're taking painkillers to go to the bathroom. I mean, that's not just football. It's like across the spectrum. It's getting better as athletes are taking better care of their body throughout their career, but it's still like, I think that's like, it's like a long shot to think that, LeBron James is going to turn into a cross country runner in his 60s. It's probably not necessarily in the cards to do something so extreme with your body again after spending so many years basically pounding it into the ground.
That raises another question. What was your recovery like, Maxine?
Yeah.
How did you feel for the next couple of days?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. I also never really answered your training question, but I will answer the recovery question. I feel like I'm still recovering. Like, I will say that these races, this one in particular, definitely kind of broke me in a new way. I felt pretty good for like the majority of the race physically, but after I stopped running, it was hard to walk for like the first 24 hours after. Like I felt like my hip was very tight. So like lifting my foot up became a lot harder on the right side. And in the last 3 weeks or so, I've gone on a couple of runs and hikes, but I've really been trying to take it easy because I feel like pains in places that I don't usually feel them. So, I try really hard to not get injured as a runner. I do a lot of strength training and core, and I don't generally do high mileage weeks compared to a lot of people. Like I do a lot of interval based workouts. I know, Anton, we've talked about this a lot back in the day. I've done a lot on the track. I do a lot of sprinting. I like this idea of like doing lower volume, but higher intensity because it usually is better for injury prevention. But I was doing a lot more going into this race, like, longer runs out, on Saturdays and Sundays with people to just try to be on my feet for a long period of time. Or I'd go alone and just try to spend like maximum hours, out. But I definitely did a lot more running going into this. And then this was the longest I had ever run in a race. So I think I'm still recovering, which feels bizarre to say. But then I listened to this other podcast today, and the two guys who came in first and second were talking about their recovery. And it sounds like it's been tough for them as well. Like it's taken a little bit longer, I think, than they anticipated to feel fully recovered. And even like watching the Stravas of the people who ran the same race that I did, a lot of people have had lingering pains and their volume of running has gone down in the last couple of weeks. So I think the recovery time for things like this, like, should not be underestimated. I think it's part of the race. I mean, some people went right back to normal. Like, I have a few friends that just are super strong and just like got right back to it, and they're fine. They're thriving, it seems. But it depends, because I think I think there is probably an ideal way to train for this, and also to like push yourself, but maybe not like too far. It's like you're always on the knife's edge of injury as a runner, and this race definitely pushed the limits. So yes. So basically, I think I'm still recovering. I think it was a really long race, and I'm trying to ease back into things before I push, too hard again.
Do you think the weather played a role in that? Like, did the guys talk about the weather being just so aggressive in terms of, because you said it was like the track was basically muddy for the majority of the race, right?
Yeah, I do think that the muddy nature of the course made it a lot more demanding physically.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. Yeah,
it was just so much sliding around. Like, I feel like I've never put that much sort of strain on my lower body whilst running a race. But it's like, I don't want to blame the course either, because you just get what you get, right? Like,
yeah,
those were the conditions we all got that day. But I do wonder if it had an impact on everyone's recovery, just because it was so much more involved. Like, you weren't just running on flat, dry ground. It was like sliding and jumping through mud and sliding down boards. It was like, it was involved.
I mean, it looks like you need to be really flexible. Like, I mean, that feels like the kind of training where it's like flexibility would have definitely been the number one determining factor in terms of your recovery, or like, your success in terms of recovery, because you could train, you could be a great runner, but it doesn't mean you're incredibly flexible. So, I mean, you're the motion it takes to slide, not to mention sliding either with verticality, sliding down, down, you're usually sliding down, not up. I could only at least theorize that probably played a big role, because you wouldn't choose that. You wouldn't, if you were going for a regular run, you wouldn't say, I'm going to go for a trail run in a torrential downpour. That's not something someone normally chooses to do. Yeah. So being forced to do it is definitely going to put extra demands on your body. So I'm not as surprised that that it's been a longer recovery, even for people who are seasoned doing something like that.
I think you're right. It's very validating. I think I felt kind of comforted hearing that. Because it's funny, because I was talking to people who ran this race, and we were like, well, next year has to be either just as bad or better. Like, these were probably the worst conditions we could have possibly gotten. And the other piece of this is actually that this summer was like one of the rainiest summers on record. It was the second wettest summer since 1969. We got Mount Washington got 48 inches of rain. Like, I looked at this up earlier because it's so validating that the Mount Washington Observatory weather researchers, they put out a lot of information about the weather on Mount Washington, which then applies to this region. But because it was such a wet summer, I feel like everything here has just been saturated already with so much water. And so in some ways, I think most people who live up here or around here were ready for this mentally. We were like, oh, of course it's raining this weekend and there's a tropical storm. This is what it's been like for the last 3 months. But even with that, I don't think anyone ever recreated these specific conditions. But at least mentally, probably we were all like, all right, well, this is just how it's been, So hopefully next summer and fall are better.
It can only get better from here, right, Jamie?
Yeah, if you've listened to our pod, it's nothing but rainbow and sunshine from here on out. In case our listeners do want to know, how do you train for these? Is there no standard approach? Because you're saying you did interval training, but you wanted to stay on your feet a little longer for this race. So what do you is there a mileage per week, per day that you're trying to hit?
That's a good question. I honestly have been thinking about getting a coach next year, even if it's only for 3 or 4 months, just to see what standard ultra training is like. Let's say if you I would want to train for something like 100 miles intentionally. And I don't really know what that looks like, but I think on average, you probably want something it depends, right? You might get injured doing this, but like probably like 40 to 60 mile weeks. And then just making sure that you're going out and probably doing like 16 hours at a time, like occasionally, just to make sure you can, be on your feet. But I feel like I'm making it up a little bit, like
you never actually do the thing until it's time to do the thing. Is there any other sport like that? I mean, maybe like mountain climbing without the harnesses where they practice and map it out and then they just give it that one go. But I'm trying to think of like you scrimmage in other games, you practice, you do it.
Most marathon I don't know about the elites, but most people who run marathons never run 26 miles prior to the marathon. They usually run something around like 20. There's a word for it. It's like not doing the full thing. There's like a colloquialism, but yeah, don't they usually run like 20, 22 or something?
Right. Like you run close to the distance, but not the full distance.
Right.
Because you have to recover from the full distance. So it's like there's a part of you that doesn't want to do that race distance because then you have to block out time to, heal. Yeah. So the thing is though, and like this is why I think I would want to get a coach or something, some guidance, because the people who I then started to think like the people who did well, like the guy who won, he did other long races this summer, I believe. So like, I think a lot of the people who did well ran like 75 mile to 100 mile plus races like months before this one. But I think they knew they had the capacity to do at least 100 miles. And I think maybe that's more so what you have to do. Like you have to build up gradually, but I think you do need to know like what your general capacity is. Like I knew that I could be awake for about 36 hours or so because I attempted something else this summer called the Hut Traverse here. And it's like a really long day. It's like 54 miles and 18,000 feet of elevation gain. I tried to do it in a single calendar day. So like I started at midnight and I had to I really started at 10 p.m. and had to like hike 2 hours into like the official start. And then I was going from like midnight to 7 p.m. Anyway, it was like a super long day. I did not finish the whole traverse, but I was awake for 36 hours by the time I got to the point where I was like, I can't go on anymore.
Wow.
So like I felt prepared in like other ways. Like I felt like, okay, like I know how long I can be awake for. I know that I can definitely do at least 37 to 50 miles because I've done that previously. But like beyond that, it was a mystery. And so I think anything you can do to like maybe minimize the mystery would help. And it's hard to do that without, also getting hurt in the process. I think that's always my biggest concern.
Feels like a very Karate Kid moment going on here. It's like you get a coach and your first session, you come out, you're in your ultra trail runners, your shorts, and you're like, all right, how much are we going to do today? And he's just like, no, you're going to stand here. You're just going to stay awake for 4 days. You're like, what does this have to do with running? Next training, it's like, you're awake for a week. It's like, when do I get to run? And he's like, you get that wax on, wax off moment. He's like, now you run. Now you run. Now that you could stay awake for 2 weeks straight, now you start to run.
Yeah, it's weird though. It's like there are these different skill sets I didn't fully understand that you needed to participate in these events.
It's just a great montage of Maxine standing in the middle of a track with rain, hail, sleet, sunshine, days going by.
Basically. Yeah. You also have to practice eating. You literally have to practice like the most basic things. Like how do you eat and then continue to run?
Well, that's a good question. What do you eat before? What is like the day before? Or is it weeks? Like are you priming your body in some way with diet? And if so, how long does that take?
I would say like I do try to practice like eating before, during, and after I'm trail running. So I would say like I had a pretty good range of snacks and whatnot. But I will say like one of the biggest struggles in this race was that like for the first time in my like running racing life, I did have like GI distress. Like I felt like very nauseous for most of the time. And my strategy was to just keep everything pretty normal. Like eat what I would typically eat for breakfast. It was like a bagel and peanut butter, or, something like simple, but like there are calories in it. I was hydrating. I didn't do anything weird the days before. I tried to eat like peanut butter and jelly and like more real foods before I, switched over to like gels and like tailwind type of things. But I must have messed up because it didn't work very well. And I did have the two people that were kind of stepping in and helping me. They were like, you need to eat real, like more like satisfying food. So I did have like instant mashed potatoes and some vegan butter. And that like, actually it felt heavier, but it felt like it sort of stabilized everything in my stomach. And then there was an aid station that had just like burritos. It was like tortilla, white rice, and beans. And I had that in between one of my laps. And I felt like it revived like my whole soul. So I think that the strategy for these races is either one, to commit to like just like liquid and gel nutrition if you want to, or really try to eat like real food, not like pseudo real food.
I don't know. I've never heard of any research or validation of this at all, and Antoine may have like a strong opposing opinion to this, but when we would train in school for sports, it was big in a few sports that you would have pasta night the night before.
Yeah,
we would get together and they would all eat pasta, and it was like you would just load up on your carbs. Is that a thing at your level, eating like that? Is that like horrible for you? I don't know if it ever gave us the boost that it was supposed to, or if it was more just a camaraderie and a placebo effect, or if there's anything to it. But that's what we would do. We would have pasta night, and the whole team would get together and we would eat.
I know, and that feels ingrained in me too from like the cross country days, like pasta or something carb heavy. So I think I did have pizza the night before. I felt like that I felt like that was benign enough. Like there were carbs and things, but it wasn't heavy. I don't know though. I feel like I need to crack that code, because I think it's a whole other piece. And, I actually think it might be truly one of the most critical pieces, because the more I listen to people who have run these long distance races, it's a lot of times they're struggling to either keep food down or like get enough calories, because things start to fall apart. Like all of my food looked suddenly unappealing. And I was like, oh no, I thought I brought enough variety, but maybe I didn't. Like I just didn't even want to eat because I felt so nauseous. And that's not good if you're trying to like go for, days. Like so
cool. Someone wrote a book about it in terms of like the people who are doing like the elite world champions, just their food diet. And would you, the follow-up question to a non-question, but did you notice that a lot more people were vegetarians or vegans that do these kinds of things, or was that something that you just didn't notice really because everyone's just trying to survive?
That's a good question. I would say I actually haven't noticed a lot of vegetarian, vegan people.
Okay. How would you notice that? Are they like snacking on a Slim Jim? How do you know that?
Well, I was just wondering in terms of.
No, I'm asking.
Well, there could be that. I'm just saying. I feel like
I eat a lot of beef.
I think you're running with a lot of people, and after a while, as everyone else has dropped out, and you're just watching these two guys go at it for 4 hours with no one else racing.
Okay, yeah, well, okay.
You would notice what they're eating at that point.
I guess that's a good point. I don't know. I do want to read about this now. Like, I want to know now, like, what are people actually eating? It's kind of like a mixed bag. I would say probably people aren't eating a lot of meat in these runs, but it does seem like a lot of carbs from what I've gathered. Maybe some protein, but like probably not in a animal protein form. But now I'm not sure.
Okay.
That's interesting though, because you ran, what did I write? 15 laps, 54 miles. People are running like 150, upwards of 150 miles. Do you all just kind of hang out at your little pit stop area and you're just kind of hanging out for a couple hours watching it? People like drinking, eating the normal food at that point, not their snacks. Like what's the atmosphere for those that have dropped out?
Yeah, it's so there is a fun element. There was like a campfire going. I mean, after I was done, I hung around to watch one of my friends who was still going. And then I hung out with some of the people who organized the race just to like watch people kind of like come in and out. but it's pretty quiet, because my last lap, I stopped running at 2 a.m. So you're just kind of there and it's very quiet, and there are people who are just walking up to the line and you can just see them like they're just like in this autopilot, like, okay, we're here for the next lap. And then they go out. And it is kind of fascinating to watch. I honestly wish I stayed a little bit longer. Like I wish I went back during the day to see what that energy was like. But by the time I was heading out, I stayed until like 6 a.m. And it was kind of low energy at that time. But I think
people leave. They're not hanging out. Not a lot of people are, because I was even going to ask you, like, pit crew, those poor people aren't even running. They're just like,
no.
Leave.
I know.
You're done now.
I should have gone back. I really wanted to, but honestly, I was so exhausted that I slept like the minute I got, I slept for like 5 hours in the middle of the day because I was like, finally I can sleep now. Cause I missed a whole night of sleep technically. So
that's fair. When we were in tournaments, unless we got really far in it, generally we did not stay to watch the last game, the championship game. We would bail if we lost early and we were like, I'm not staying. I want to go home and rest. Yeah. So I get that. I was just curious how that works, but it's so long.
It is.
Because you could drop out at like 9, 8, 6 p.m. and you're saying it go on into the next morning, the following day. That's crazy.
Yeah. It's so bizarre, honestly, but it's so cool because it's so bizarre.
Does anyone do drone footage of these races? Like, do they have like a drone, like a feed? Because I'm feeling a market need here. Because I'd want to watch this. I think that there'd be really interesting.
I assume there has to be
commentating with a drone.
If not, I will show up with mine. Let me know, and then
that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, maybe this is something we could get on here because.
Okay, so next year, come up to New Hampshire. Bring everybody. Bring the children. It's a fun.
I can even set it so it follows you.
Oh my gosh, that would be wild.
That'd be cool.
There was a photographer who did have a drone because there are some like photos from up above, but
there has to be. This has to be a thing. Bubba has to have a drone.
Bubba must have a drone.
But not just for photos. Like I'm talking about like the live feed. It's like I went home, but then you kick back, put up the laptop, and you're like, what's going on in the race? And then there's the drone circling the front runner. That'd be so cool.
Problem is like you would have to so precisely operate the drone because it's so tree covered. Like you're kind of in the trees the whole time. So like most of the course wouldn't be visible unless you did like literally have the drone just like
at eye level
navigating.
A thermal camera.
Ooh, heat map. A little heat map.
That would honestly be pretty cool. I mean, I know the World Championship was streaming it on YouTube, I believe, but I don't know where they had cameras set up.
You could probably put them on trees at that point. Like, I mean, there's people do stuff like that. That's interesting.
That is interesting.
Or I wonder, are there
style?
I was gonna say even like no. Are there any like pace setters or trailers like a bike or an ATV or something in the front and back?
No, it's kind of just you do what you want. I think you can have people show up and do some laps with you if you want. Like it's not allowed, but
frowned upon.
Not too common.
Antoine could show up for a couple.
Yeah, honestly, it's so fun.
Oh, does anyone wear a GoPro? Can you wear a GoPro?
You could, but I didn't see anyone wearing a GoPro. I do wish that I took 0 photos during this race because I was like so tired, like pretty much the whole time. But I wish that I did record more because like I'm so grateful. I have like one photo of me crossing the line at night. And it's like now my favorite photo, but it's like it was hard to like get, it was hard to document this as it was happening because it's so hard. Like I personally didn't have the energy. Some people will like record, videos or audio while they're doing it. And I kind of wish I did that. Like I wish at like the end of every lap, I said something into a camera just to like watch the like unraveling. Cause like once the sun set on the first night, the sunset, we went out with our headlamps on because like we knew it was going to get dark and it gets dark pretty early in October. And then it started raining like around the same time that it got dark. And I just felt my mood like plummet. I was like, oh no, I have to get the positivity back. And it was fine, like it was still fun, but it was like all of a sudden it got a lot harder. And so I think from then on it was a little bit, energy.
I just feel like you're bordering on Blair Witch style after a while. If it's just you having to focus on keeping this camera, like the battery. First of all, the battery alone, you have no time to charge this thing. You can't keep the camera going for 3 days straight on you as you're running through the woods. I mean, I think that's probably why it doesn't happen more.
That's
often.
true. But it would be cool even to show up and document it. Like if you're not running, I feel like there's a lot of potential for getting some cool footage of like trying to, briefly interview people without, interrupting it too much. Like it'd be fun to film this event.
I think so. Yeah, I agree.
Documentary style.
Yeah.
Guerrilla documentary style. Running alongside, you're trying to get the lead guy every time he's coming through, and he's just like, get out of my face. He's like, this is real, brother. This is real.
Turn the camera off. You're not recording, right? And it's just the audio. You cover the lens and the audio's still going.
It's so easy to imagine.
This is a silly question because you kind of talked about it when you were like slipping and all that kind of stuff. But does anyone ever trip and fall over like roots and rocks? Like, is that like a thing?
People definitely trip.
And does that cause like the big mess that like in cycling where someone falls and it's just like a huge thing?
It could, because everyone was pretty close. I definitely I almost slipped in a way that would have been bad, but I caught myself. So you're always navigating, like you have to be really careful about your footing. I didn't see anyone take a bad fall, but like I felt the potential,
Is there a med team on standby? Like for most races, I feel like there is, even for something as like community organized as this. There was no like volunteer paramedic or anything like that.
I didn't see anyone, but I would imagine that at this event there were several people who were capable, but I'm not sure there's.
Isn't that like a liability thing? Wouldn't I'm assuming Bubba's still around and it's Bubba's race, but wouldn't Bubba need to have that?
Well, so the race is organized by this like company store called Ski the Whites, which is also like Run the Whites and Ride the Whites depending on the season. So the guy who owns the store, Andrew Drummond, his dad owns the land, so he's Bubba. So it does have like a little bit more weight, that there's like kind of a like a tangible like store behind it and like sponsors, but I don't know. I actually just don't know if there was like a medic tent, but we also weren't that far from like a major hospital as well.
Because I remember, and again, it's hard because I don't know exactly how structured or organized the event is, but I mean, you could go to like a traveling soccer tournament for, under 15 or whatever, and there's at least an ambulance on the field, like on the premise. There's not a tent where you would go
usually,
but there's at least an ambulance there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you would think there'd be something, but again, we were not that far. I also don't like, so many people up here have like various like first aid, like wilderness first aid certifications too. So I'm wondering if there were just like a handful of people who were actually first aid certified. I would imagine so, but I'm not positive.
I mean, that's what I'd want. A guy who just ran for 36 hours straight coming to my aid to be like, performing CPR. He's got like no strength left in his hands.
Well, there were plenty of people not running the race.
No backseat. Everyone was running.
Everyone there was doing something difficult. Honestly, like the people, like I feel so grateful, for the people who did put this race on and the race volunteers, because their job was hard too. And even when I finished and was just standing around with them, I got cold immediately. Like the temperature dropped, and they're just like standing there counting laps, making sure everything is like, the first, the aid stations have food and water and everything. So, I mean, a lot of work goes into this event, and they did a really great job because it's a fun community event, honestly.
How many people do you think show up, like spectators and all?
Well, so about 100 people ran the race, and I'd say if everyone had like at least one person with them, it might have been like 200 people.
Wow.
And we were all kind of like parked on this like lawn that was pretty close to the start. So part of the strategy too is getting a good spot for your little station. So I wasn't too far from the start finish line.
Is there is it like marked off? Does everyone get like 5 by 5? How does that work?
It's not, which is a little stressful. Like I felt a little stressed. I was like,
is someone taking up more room to push other people out?
Right. So I got very fortunate. One of my friends had like an easy up tent. So we like parked next to each other and he very kindly shared his tent space with me, which was great because it was also raining all day and it was nice to like be in the same space as a friend. But like I feel like we took up a standard amount of space. So basically like whatever you imagine those like easy up tents to be plus like 2 cars, that's kind of like what everyone was sort of occupying.
I know exactly what you're talking about. When I went to the first Firefly festival, and I thought it was going to be this big camping experience, and it was just a grass parking lot.
Yeah,
you pulled up with your car to this little plot of land that was sectioned off, and you had just enough room for your tent, and it was your car and your tent on your little plot. And I was like, wow. Okay, so I think that's probably the area that you had.
Yes, it's about that. Like you just have enough room and everyone like tried to squeeze in to the best of their ability because, limited space. But it surprisingly worked out. Like it was okay. People had really elaborate setups too. Like it was impressive to see. I got some ideas. If you really want to like show up and be serious, there's a lot you can do in that space.
Jamie, yeah. I really thought you were making a big, like doing a bit there. I thought when you said Firefly, I thought you were talking about the Fire Festival.
I also thought that.
And I thought you were going to say, I showed up to this island and there was no food, there was no water.
I should have.
I really thought that's where it was going as well. I'm glad I wasn't alone.
Okay, missed opportunity. No, this was, I think, in Delaware, not Fire Festival, which I think that dude is trying to put on another one, if I read a headline correctly.
I believe it. Yeah, I heard something like that. Yeah.
Who would go to that?
You never know.
Influencers.
Have you done an episode on it?
I don't think so.
No, we've never talked about it.
No.
It's not really on our to-do list.
You do have a lot of other important topics to cover, so
try to do light ones every once in a while, but no. And all I know about that is the documentary.
Yeah.
There are 2. The Hulu and the Netflix.
I don't even know which one I saw.
Yeah. Competing documentaries. They show it in slightly different lights. Got to watch both and make up your mind. Now, word from our sponsor, Ultra.
No, I think you name dropped your footwear.
I did. Am I not allowed to?
No, you can.
You can do whatever you want.
Just know you're not getting paid.
Basically,
it's for free. No one here is getting paid.
Nope. I want to thank Maxine for coming out, walking us through this amazing journey as city slickers compared to you out there in the ruralness of our fair nation. And thanks. Really, that was really cool. I love hearing about these little excursion adventures that you so often happen on.
I actually have one more question.
Yes.
Now that Antoine says rural. You've trekked across multiple trails, I think, all across the country. Is rural no matter where it is? Is East Coast, West Coast, middle of the country, is it all the same?
That's a good question. I've never thought about that. It's so yeah. Is rural no matter where you are, or
like
no matter where you are?
Rural?
Like, does it like whether you're rural now or even if you've done trails that were rural, is there a difference? Like rural New Jersey is not the same as rural Montana. No, I'm just going to go out and say that. Right. And so that's what I kind of mean. Is the country, does it have that kind of same feel in its open space regardless of where you are? Or is it like West Coast is definitely more vacant, more natural? That's
a good question because I do feel like it's different based on where you go, but I'm like trying to think of how to articulate it.
Yeah,
like,
why? Right? Why is it different?
Yeah, like I think I personally think it has more to do with the landscape, like Montana, like Idaho, Wyoming, rural feels more like, you're in like the American West of like just like vast open space, and it does feel truly remote. Like you have to drive like a dirt road for 2 hours to get to town.
The ghost of Davy Crockett rural. That's what we're going to classify that as.
Crockett rural. And then like rural here, it just feels like you're more like tucked away in the woods, which to me feels a little bit different. Like you are isolated in a sense, but it's like a cozier isolation. Like you
can't comfortable because you have access to amenities.
Or like, I mean, you still might have to drive like an hour or two, depending on just where you live. And even up here, like I do sometimes feel far from like resources that I definitely would have taken for granted in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. So, but it's just, it makes me feel like I'm not really that rural. It's just relative, but there are definitely spots like I would think like some parts of Maine feel very like remote and isolated. But I guess it just has a different feeling. Like it's just different based on the landscape and the climate that you're in too, right? Because they all pose different risks alongside being kind of outside of civilization. But I mean, maybe the internal experience is the same. I think it just looks different.
I wonder if there's like a rural rating.
There should be. There really should be, actually. Because I mean, as you're saying this, I'm thinking because it's like there's like the ruralness of like where's mostly corn? Where's the corn?
Like Iowa?
Is that it? Yeah. Like I feel like rural Iowa. Yeah, there's nothing around, but majority of the land is still owned and it's still developed. And so it's like, yeah, you're not seeing majestic, oil painting masterpiece landscapes, but there's nothing there. Yeah, there's nothing around, but the land is still owned. Like it's owned by people. There's tons of corn. There's tons of field that's being worked necessarily, even though there's like no trappings of urbanization.
It almost sounds like a human activity type rating. How much human activity?
Exactly. How much that's exactly what I would go with. How much human activity? It's like you're rural, yes, but there's tons of technical human activity because the land is owned and being worked versus Montana where it's pristine, it's left untouched. There's no one around. There's no one actually working this land. There's no jobs here. It's just natural aesthetic going on. That's how I would rate it.
I think you're right. Cause like, it's making me wonder like what the actual definition of rural is now, because it does feel like I have this concept in my head of what it means. But like, if you're like isolated in the mountains, is that rural or are you just isolated? Cause I feel like I'm just in the mountains, right? But maybe I'm not really rural. Also, this word is getting harder to say.
It does. The more you say it is the harder it becomes. It's something.
But I feel like there's probably rural's probably like its own category, and then there are degrees to it. But it is interesting if there was no rating. I feel like, do we have something here? Can we just start rating it?
We could. I mean, we do talk about cities that way, right? There's walkable cities, and then there are like in America, which is wild, but talk about this all the time. There are cities like LA, for instance, where you have to have a car, and they're calling that a city. I'm like, that's not a city. A city is something where you can do without a car and find your way around quite comfortably. That to me is a city. Which
I think it's just by population, right?
No, it has nothing to do with population.
No,
LA is huge. LA has a ridiculous population, and you have to drive everywhere. Versus,
but it's a city.
Yeah, I know, but I'm saying that.
But I'm saying I think that's how they define cities. I think it's by population.
Oh, you're just saying that if just a large group of people come together, then we need to start redefining cities. That's my argument here is that. In this redefining rural, that we need to redefine cities. A large group of people happen to be nestled next to one another does not a city make. That's just a large group of people happen to be nestled next to one another.
You city snob.
I would love to hear you both talk more about this because how do you define this? I'm not sure.
There's got to be some. I mean, there's urban developers, there's land developers. They have to have some type of classification. This has to be a thing.
Yeah, probably.
Like, it seems like it would come down to population density in some capacity, but it's not. It's not how they're nestled.
It's definitely like you're definitely. I mean, there are states that are just more rural because of their population size per the state size, right? Like there are population density per the state size. So, I mean, to say like, okay, yeah, you're not in the middle of Montana, so you're not rural. I don't think that would be right.
Yeah.
And sorry, go on. No,
I was just gonna say, I just the other day looked this up. I think Alaska has like the most land and the fewest people, and then like Wyoming is second, and Wyoming feels pretty rural.
Yeah, I would have thought like Dakotas and stuff, but anywhere up there, I guess, right? It's just like all kind of.
I was going to use more of the East Coast as an example, because like people talk about West Virginia, and they're like, oh wow, West Virginia, that's rural. But if you really look at the mileage, rural parts of West Virginia are like 20 miles outside of DC. It's just there's just not any infrastructure. Does that make rural? It's like just because you have no infrastructure, no real people live here, but you're right outside of a city. Whereas, the 20 miles outside of Boston is still, that's like greater Boston. You're still in suburbs. Interesting. At that point, you would never say that's rural.
Yeah, I mean, like the lack of infrastructure, the lack of support, you would be living a rural lifestyle, but is your geographical location considered that because of your proximity to major population centers? Yeah. I don't know what the relationships there would be, but that is an interesting thing, because who cares if you're right next to DC if you don't benefit from it in any way, and you're still living like you would be in the middle of Alaska. Like if you're like, I live in the hills of West Virginia, you can put me down in Alaska and I'll survive just fine.
Right.
Like, does it matter then? So that's an interesting question.
Yeah, I think you're getting closer to the definition with that, like an infrastructure accessibility oriented definition of rural.
Right? Because what if it was, to play this game, 2 people in the entire state, but they had everything they needed?
Right.
Is it rural? I don't know.
Or 2 people living in a place where you can walk and not need a car.
That's what I mean. Everything they need. They have everything. They have access to.
Well, that's a city. Then I would say that they live in a city.
Yeah. But there's only 2
that's
people,
more of a city.
Population density doesn't really, that by itself isn't it.
Right.
Are there strict definitions for towns versus cities? I could Google this.
I think it's all population, unfortunately, which we're finding out right now in this conversation is woefully short. The number of people living in a place should not define what you then call that place. In fact, we probably continue with this because of how little we invest in infrastructure. It benefits us in order to continue to call our towns, counties, cities, when in fact, if you were to use the real definitions, most of America would be rural because there's just no infrastructure. So you would actually just start saying, yeah, there's 8 million people living in a rural community because you have no infrastructure.
Yeah.
Your bridge collapsed. I guess we're rural.
Basically, that's exactly what you would start.
How many potholes in a road until it's not a road anymore?
Wow. Yeah, this is great to think about, though. Good question.
Awesome.
Well, thank you both for having me on. I really do appreciate you taking the time to try to understand the crazy things that I'm doing out here. And just, it makes me think a little bit differently about what I am doing. So thank you for giving me this opportunity and platform. It's really nice.
And you make us think a little differently about you widen our horizons outside of our Jerseyness. Outside of
you open up our
urban sphere. Open
up our eyes to a whole new world. Every time you come, you're bringing this whole new world with you.
Oh, that's so nice. It's mutual though, because I'm thinking about it in new ways because you ask good questions. So thank you.
Jamie, where can the listeners find us?
Folks, you can subscribe, share, and comment. New episodes on Fridays, content out daily. We're on YouTube, Twitter, and wherever you listen to podcasts.
And with that, a very rural retraction. Ow.